I want to spend time discussing material in Chapter 2 of Henderson. It's a very compact chapter full of information. The assumption is that people who take this course at the graduate level have had economics background, and most people either don't have that or they had exposure to limited economics a long time ago and so forth. But nonetheless, it's an incredibly important chapter in the book, even though it's condensed in a very small chapter. But we need to understand all the ideas in there to help us for the remainder of the course. So let's start with basically asking the question of why do we bother with economics? Well, economics is about scarcity of resources, and therefore, because of that, we are forced to allocate. And allocation both to production, meaning take the resources and mix them and put them into some kind of a environment in which it produces the output. You know, we hire doctors and nurses and hospitals and pharmaceutical products, etc., and mix them together, and we produce medical care. And then once we produce the medical care, then we have to allocate again for consumption. So we have production, which is the supply side, and then eventually consumption, which is the demand side. And so this allocation is with us, and so the next question is how effective, or in economic terms, efficient is this allocation. Allocation of resources efficiently, meaning use them wisely for the best results in production, and then once the output is produced, take advantage of it without wasting any part of that output, the labor of and efforts that went into production of it. So we have efficiency in production questions, and then we have efficiency in consumption, which stays with us. And of course, this forces us to engage in decision making. And economists have a very unique sort of thought process, extremely useful, not for balance in a budget and so forth, but for strategy, for long-term thinking, how resources come together, how the human behavior can be incentivized, what are the consequences of those incentives, what are the unintended consequences of those incentives. If Chinese limited resources impose one-child policy, that the couples are not allowed to have one more child because they assume that they just cannot feed everyone, it would add to the poverty. And then 30 years later, they realize that the population is getting old, and the couples did not reproduce enough to replace them. And as a result, now they've gone back to actually introduce more than one child policy, except that another thing has happened. The young population, those who are educated and urbanized, they like to have fun, they like to travel, and one child is enough. And maybe some of them decide to go without even one child, as some of the Central Europeans have decided to do, that they either postpone parenthood, and when they do, no more than one, and so therefore they are faced with declining population and aging population. So economists are concerned about all of these issues, and how to allocate resources that would have near and long-term implications. How the millennials think in terms of home ownership, in terms of family formation, in terms of energy consumption, in terms of lifestyle. All of those will have ramifications for healthcare, for housing, for transportation, etc., etc. So economists are most equipped than any other field, partly because it's the most powerful field of social sciences, and it's not limited to any sort of scope of thinking. Psychology, sociology, social psychology, history, mathematics, engineering, all of those can be incorporated in economic thinking. And there are schools of thought. It's nothing set in stone. Over centuries, economic thinking has evolved, adapting to the environment. Schools of thoughts have emerged. In fact, in current presidential year, there's much debate about globalization, about immigration, and so forth. These things were resolved and done with 30 years ago, and then fast forward have resurfaced. The human and social issues do not die, they just resurface in different forms, and therefore requires a new thinking. Much of the economics that you get exposed to is what we call neoclassical economics. And this is essentially the laissez-faire, competition, globalization, mobility of resources, etc., which is the central to this idea, and also self-interest. Self-interest of capitalists, those who owned factories and private hospitals and tools and so forth, to maximize return on their assets, because they're interested in themselves and their own profits. And then on the part of the citizens, households, those who basically don't own much other than their talent and skill and their labor time, where they sell it in the marketplace, and they're interested in maximizing their pleasure from life based on the income they earn from their labor, so they can vacation and they can party and they can celebrate, etc., etc. They can enjoy life. So consumers are interested in maximizing utility or satisfaction, and minimizing pain or displeasure from from what they do consume. And then the capitalists are interested in profit maximization and so forth and so on. And embedded in this conversation is the assumption of rational behavior. People 3 decades ago won Nobel Prize for arguing that people are rational, meaning that they just do things in their own interest with whatever information they have available, etc. And then now, of course, fast forward 30 years later, there are ample evidence that people don't always behave in a rational way. They do things that harm themselves, and they just don't realize it, partly because they can't understand and process information, they don't have the skills, they don't have the education, and partly because of the nudging that through advertisements and promotions and government policies and so forth, people are nudged into certain behavior that may or may not be in their own interest. Massive commercials on alcoholic beverages, for example, or the literature that alcohol, for instance, could be good for you, even though there are also research out there that shows that it could also be bad for you, and yet you hear that some alcohol is fantastic, and people, including myself, sometimes indulge in a beer or two because of that good news you hear that there are some even potentially health benefits with moderate consumption of alcohol, for instance. So are we rational? Not quite, not exactly as some economists had kind of argued some decades ago. We are increasingly beginning to see evidence that people are not behaving exactly in a rational manner. And so therefore needs to, and then slowly the economic thinking is changing. That's how paradigms come about. Somebody comes up with an idea, provides some ample evidence, then some people kind of see wisdom in that and kind of cling on to it and become part of the new thinking, and it can go on for quite some time, not only in the field of social sciences and humanities, but even science, physics, and so forth. That then the new paradigm emerges, all the scientists write and think along those lines with those set of assumptions until somebody comes along and broadside the sort of mainstream thinking with the new ideas and new theories, and then if it's strong enough and gains enough subscribers and followers, then a new paradigm will emerge. As we are slowly questioning the assumptions of the new classical economics these days, slowly people are in search of what else. So how else should we be thinking about globalization, about trade? Can we assume that people who lose their jobs somewhere can pack up and go somewhere else to find a new job? Or would they just stay put even though they are in misery and their livelihood is drastically affected, the divorces and family breakdowns and this and that and the other thing, and infrastructure meltdown, and yet they don't move? Are they irrational, or are they just behaving the way they know how? So that's really sort of how economists think, with understanding that it is not set in stone and is subject to evolutionary thinking. We had talked earlier about three primary questions: what to produce, how much healthcare, how much leisure and travel, and how much cars, and how much clothing and so forth we need and also want, assuming that want are determined based on willingness and ability to pay. I'm willing to take a nice vacation, but am I able to pay? I am certainly willing to have a higher level of medical care when I need it, but am I able to pay for it? Wants are basically focusing on who's interested and whether they can pay the price, and then if that's the case, then their wants will be satisfied. If not, tough luck. Then there's a question of need, and that is basically an expert determined. People need a shelter to sleep and reproduce themselves so that they can work the next day. They can't live under the bridge and then show up bright and bushy, well-groomed, ready to have a PowerPoint presentation. That doesn't work. Or show up in the factory. So it is in the interest of owners of capital that the workers get enough rest and food so that they can come and produce. Are they compassionate? No. Do they care necessarily? No. They just care about profit, and the profit making requires healthy and well-rested workforce so that they can use them to make the goods for sale. But nonetheless, shelter and transportation and communication, all those things or education become part of the need. And then there is some sort of a gray area: when is a need for the society, and whether the society has to pay for it or subsidize it, or should it be all assumed to be a want kind of thing, like education, for example, college education. Does a country need educated engineers and scientists and writers and so forth? or is it something that people like to become engineer and they might as well pay for it? And what if some people cannot afford to pay for it and the country needs them? And so therefore we have to kind of figure out ways to get people trained even though they cannot afford themselves. And then of course, once we produce this stuff, we want to be efficient, not only in production, that's how to produce it efficiently, and then of course we want to distribute it also equitably or efficiently, and that's a very heated debate as to what is an equitable distribution. Who should get it? Should handicapped people get it? Should children get it? Should old people get it, even though they can't afford to pay for it? Should others be super productive so that they can pay for themselves and have left over to pay for those who cannot get it? Do we behave in a Spartan society where if a child was born weak and fragile, they basically toss them over the cliff because their society needed warriors? And if it didn't look like you're going to grow up to become a warrior, there was no point keeping you, and that type of thing, And so therefore, that's a question of distribution, who is to receive these goods and services once we produce them. And of course, incentives and disincentives. If you tax somebody heavily to pay for those who can't afford it, some people say, why am I working so hard, or why am I not seeing the rewards and for my talent, because what I do is taken away from me. And of course, that's a political sentiment. Some people are delighted that they're so productive, so talented, some of it with their own hard work, some of it as a result of some turn of events and circumstances that they had nothing to do with it. It was not like they're very super talented. They happened to be born in a wealthy family or educated family, and they received better education, better opportunities, and so they now are doing well and they're very productive, produce a lot of wealth. And there are those who say it's all mine, and there are those who say, well, I am blessed with those talents and opportunities. I might as well use some of this wealth that I can generate to help those who were not blessed with similar opportunities and talent and so forth. And that is a sentiment. You go into Scandinavian countries, they are more open to the idea of being taxed and helping those who are kind of the bottom. And you go in some other societies like the US, the question becomes very difficult as to how much you're willing to pay taxes to help the poor, and how hostile you might be toward the poor, or what we call working poor. There's not only poor, but working poor. People are working, but the kind of wages they get just keep them perpetually in poverty, and sometimes generation after generation. So those are the kind of thought processes that emerge in economic thinking, just kind of a snapshot of it. Now, let's think about optimization. Whatever we do, whatever decision we make, we expect some benefits from it. So there are benefits. And then there are all costs also. Say, would the benefit of anything we do forever will rise? No, eventually, no matter how good anything is, will fizzle out. We'll get tired of it, or resources that are going to producing that stuff that benefits us eventually become marginal resources, and they're not really are fantastic anymore in that activity or endeavor. And so when you kind of put that thought process, here's a sort of how we build a model. Let's say a decision, like let's say use the textbook units of medical care to decide to produce, right, and consume. There are benefits. If you consume nothing, you get no benefits. And here on the vertical axis, we track benefits and costs. I should say total benefits and total costs. And so if you consume zero, you get nothing out of it. As you consume or produce more of this, so the decision is to consume more of the unit medical care, the benefits will rise, but it tapers off. Okay, so this is the total benefit. On the cost side, when you produce nothing, cost nothing, and so forth, but as you produce or consume more of this item, in this case medical care, costs will eventually escalate. Why? Because as you go more and more into production of this, resources that are sucked in are increasingly less useful. You're getting increasingly less, you get increasingly more marginal talent and resources because you're going too far, and therefore the cost escalates. So, but if in mathematical terms, you could see that the slope, even though it's positive, is declining. This declining slope is steeper and flatter and flatter. With this, the slope is what we call marginal, or rate of change. Margin of value, or rate of change, and in this case is declining. So if we were to kind of depict that as well, here again, units of medical care, and this is marginal cost and marginal benefit. Marginal benefit of all good decisions, doesn't matter what it is, eventually declines. And marginal cost, which is the slope of the total cost, you could see is rising. Rate of change is as every time we add to one more unit of medical care, the rate by which the cost rises, it gets faster and faster. Now here you can see that the rate of increasing cost is higher than the rate of increase in production, and so that means that marginal costs will increase also. And where do we make a good decision? Well, we make a decision as long as marginal benefit, even though it's declining, is higher than the marginal cost. We continue in this direction, and we'll stop here where marginal cost is equal to marginal benefit. Do we can go beyond that? No. If marginal cost exceeds marginal benefit, our decisions, then we cut back. For every additional unit, it costs more than it benefits us, and we cut back, and this will be where we stopped, where basically we're in equilibrium. Now the next question is, well, who determines the marginal costs and marginal benefits? It can be subjective. Two people can look at the same idea, same project, and one will see nothing but disaster and cost, and one will see nothing but profits and very small costs associated with it. So therefore, how do we resolve this issue? You try to be non-partisan, you try to be fact-based, you try to be evidence-based, you try to be not non-ideological, etc. And you have to be competent, skilled in correctly measuring costs and benefits, because sometimes it gets kind of tricky. You go to college, you get the benefits in terms of higher income, future income, and so forth. But how about the society? Well, society also benefits from that education because you're a productive member of society, you pay taxes and so forth, you make better decisions. So therefore society also benefits. And do we have a system by which not only accounts for your benefits but also the benefits that society receives from your education? And similarly, when you incur a cost, let's say cost of healthcare, the society also has an interest in making sure that that cost that you incur to maintain your health is minimal, because if you have to burden the entire cost of your medical care, you may not have much left over for anything else to do. And so oh, how about food and shelter and your children's education? So that we try to kind of figure out a way, if we can, we're not successful these days, to see that the medical care is affordable, because it has other issues related to it. So that's one very critical economic thinking, marginal cost, marginal benefit analysis. We also said that, because of allocation of resources and so forth, how do we allocate? Well, we can allocate in all kinds of ways. Old days used to be that if you belong to a certain line of blood, the royal family, you get it. You get the land, and you get the minerals, and you get everything you want. And if you didn't have that lineage, you don't get nothing. You just basically are a serf or a peasant and so forth. And then over time, the market evolved, and people start selling stuff that they produce on their own, as opposed to somebody taking it from them. If you live in a feudal system, the feudal lord will take everything you produce, and you didn't have anything surplus, and they give you back enough to eat so that you could survive one growing season to the next. But there was nothing left in your hands. And eventually, as feudalism declined and people became tradesmen and so forth, they began to produce things for themselves, and then they had surplus. The surplus was available for sale and all that. So that gave rise to markets. And eventually we had introduction of currency or money to facilitate the function of the market. Instead of barter economy, people can exchange things for money and come back later when they were ready for the next stuff and so forth. That gave rise to ideas about supply and demand, and sellers and buyers and so forth. So here we're going to discuss some of the topics related to this. I have given you links to a series of short video clips. Here is a kind of a review. I don't want to make this a very lengthy conversation here, but essentially we'll begin with the demand side analysis, in which we basically have a law of demand, price and quantity for a certain product, let's say X, and the assumption is that at this price people buy a certain quantity, and then when price drops people buy more, and then somewhere everywhere in between. And then when you connect these points, you get the demand curve is downward sloping, which means that these two variables are negatively related: higher price, lower quantity; lower price, higher quantity. And so therefore that by definition would have to be a downward sloping curve. So price and quantity. But what if things other than price? Because we said that as price goes up, people buy less, or if it drops. So what if other things other than price, like consumer taste, aging population, more wealth, economic decline, rainy season, snowy season, hurricanes, love and peace, and on and on and on, global warming, whatnot. So how do we account for those? Well, if that leads to more demand at the current prices, so we hold the price constant and say, well, at this price people are kind of like this stuff more than before, and same thing here. So the demand shifts to the right, meaning increasing demand at every price due to things that are not related to the price of the good itself. People just hear good news, they like it, they're entering the age that they need more of it, and they get raised, and so they want to buy more of this stuff, whatever that is, expensive cut of meat or nicer vacation and so forth. And then the reverse is also true, that people kind of lose taste for it. There's bad news about it. People don't need it anymore. On and on. So the demand can shift to the left with any given price. So that's a decrease in demand. And in those short videos, I've kind of gone through a more detailed elaboration of what affects the demand curve. Quickly here, the demand function, quantity demanded for X is a function of its price of substitutes, meaning that what else is competing with it. So if the substitute becomes more expensive, people buy more of this product because the alternative is more expensive. If the substitute prices decline, people they switch to the other product and cut back on the consumption of this product. Price of complements, and complement goods are stuff that you go together, like gasoline and automobile, and the surgery and X-rays, and on and on, and doctor visit as a complement good to secure prescription medication, so forth. And so what the relationship, when the price of complement goes up, this product becomes more expensive as a whole to get it, and so people get less of it. If you have to have pizza with beer and beer prices go up, you buy less pizza for some of those who have to have it together. And if the price of complements decline, then the whole package becomes less expensive and people buy more of this stuff. Income, and then more income, holding the price constant, more demand, less income, less demand for normal goods, and then from that point on, open-ended conversation, anything that subject matter experts would say can affect the demand for the product. And it's very, very important distinction to remember when you use market model. The demand curve you have to know when you go from one point of demand curve to the next on the existing as opposed to shifting. And your failure to make that distinction can result in incorrect analysis. Very important thing to remember. And here the assumption is that the consumer is sovereign. You make a decision based on what you are able to pay and so forth. We have a whole ball of wax of discussion as to what happens with the demand if you cannot afford to pay. Should you not have demand for it? Should you not have demand for medical care if you don't have ability to pay for it, or for that matter education and so forth? And we'll discuss those in turn. Relevant, very relevant to this conversation is price sensitivity. It's called own price elasticity. We have other concepts of elasticity, cross price elasticity, income elasticity, and for that matter, all those other factors that appear in this demand function. Demand depends on, or is a function of, price and price of other goods. That's where cross price elasticity comes from. And income, if your income rises by 10%, will you buy 10% more? Would you buy 25% more, or you just buy 1% more? Some products are very income sensitive, like Starbucks coffee, and then there are some products that are necessities. Doesn't matter your income, you've got to have it. And so income doesn't play as much role in certain products, and others are extremely income sensitive and so forth. And the own price elasticity, let's just focus on that. Quantity and a price of, let's say, good X. There are all kinds of scenarios can happen. Let's say this is the current price, and this is the quantity consumed or purchased, and then we drop the price significantly, and the purchase increases slightly. So if we connect these 2 points, you get the steep curve. Significant change in price results in a minor, relatively small change in the quantity demanded. This is called inelastic demand curve. Okay. In this case, if we took sort of how do you measure this, we say, well, elasticity is defined as percentage change in quantity demanded for a good X when there's some percentage change in price of the same good. And here, if we raise the price, let's say 10%, quantity demanded changes by maybe 2%. So if you divide these two, you get a less than 1 value. So always a negative number, because you increase the price and the quantity demanded decline, or you decrease the price, then the quantity demanded will increase. So there's always a negative sign for this ratio. And so we look at the only absolute value, ignore the sign. We know the sign is negative. We'll just look at the magnitude. If it's bigger than less than 1, we call it inelastic. If on the other hand P1, this is Q1, and then we drop the price slightly, and then people react crazy over this thing. So if we connect these 2 points, we get a flatter demand curve. So in this case, let's say 2% change in price resulted in 10% change in quantity demanded, and so this would be a bigger than 1 ratio in absolute terms, and we call this elastic. Here is a case of a price sensitivity. Elastic, price sensitive. Higher price, drastic cutback. Lower price, drastic increase in consumption. Previous case was a steeper curve, and reverse was true. And this is very important. For example, we ask the question, is medical care price elastic or inelastic? Well, it is inelastic. People will take a second mortgage to pay for their medical care if they have to. But this is, in fact, particularly true when they have insurance, government insurance, private insurance. You go to a doctor and say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and say, how much is my copay? You say, well, $25, $30. They say, go for it. Do you ask the question of how badly do I need to have this test? You don't ask that question because they don't ask you to pay. If you had to pay, you obviously will ask tough questions. Do I really need it? Can I wait and take some aspirin to see what maybe inflammation goes down and so forth? And but the question is, do we want people to shop around and be price sensitive when it comes to medical care? Some societies say no, that's one of your needs. When you need it, you will have to have access to it. The doctor or provider will decide how badly you need it, and because you don't know the difference, and so we basically make it provided by taxpayers and so forth. In some societies, you say if you cannot afford it, you don't need it. If you can pay for it, you need it, and so forth. So we have this, debate as to how much of a medical care should be need or want, and should we make people shop around, or should we just take that decision out of their hands and say, you need it, we'll figure out a way to get it to you. You don't have to get on the phone and try to shop around for this thing. And perhaps some of it, a little bit of both will make sense. You don't want people to wastefully consume medical care if they were in charge of the decision as to how much to consume, and often we are not. So therefore, I am one of those who refuses to blame patients or consumers for rapidly rising cost of medical care, because most of the time consumers, patients, receive what is recommended, not what they know, because they just don't know. And so therefore this is very, very important consideration. There are, of course, extreme examples of this. If your demand is totally independent of the price, like insulin, type 1 diabetic, and you need insulin, you need a certain quantity, and doesn't matter whether 0 or zillion, you have to have it. So demand is extremely price insensitive, or this is perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic. Absolute necessity, life and death. This happens to people who are addicted to illicit drugs. They'll commit any crime to get it because they're so desperate, and so therefore you cannot scare them enough. If somebody is addicted to something that is life and death and so forth, and psychologically, they will commit any kind of crime to get it, and there's no deterrent unless you help them to come off of it. They will commit all kinds of crimes to get it, and that's why some people argue for legalization of drugs as a way of taking the crime incentive out of it, and then deal with it some other way. And then there's another extreme of this demand curve, and that is when it's horizontal, which means that this is the price. If somebody wants to offer it at a slightly higher, we'll sell 0. Why? People have so many choices. They don't have to put up with you. You raise the price, nobody buy from you. They'll go buy from somebody else. This is a case of perfectly elastic demand curve. Right? That's where consumers have a lot of choice, a lot of competition out there, all selling the same stuff. You have so readily access to any one of them. You go to farmer's market, and the price of cucumbers is $1, and that's it. Nobody can sell for $1.01 for the same cucumber that everybody else has, and you can within feet buy it from your from their competition, that kind of thing. So therefore, very, very important thing to remember. As what sellers do, they want to lock you into a situation where your demand curve will look like this, where even if they hike the price, you will not cut back on your purchase significantly. They like that, but if they cannot help it, and then they have a lot of competition, so they're very sensitive. They'll make sure that they can lower the price if they can get a lot of sales out of population and consumers. And so in this case, it makes sense to lower the price, but because you sell a lot more. Doesn't make sense to raise the price because you lose a lot of customers and revenue. In the other case, you can raise the price significantly, people only cut back slightly, like if you're addicted to cigarettes and so forth, and so you're better off raising price because your overall revenue will be higher than if you lower the price, because if you lower the price, not many people will just jump on it just because the price is lower. So if you lower the price of a pack of cigarettes, people who normally smoke 1 pack are not going to say, well, it's so cheap, let me go smoke 3 packs. It's just the body needs 1 pack, and they're adapted to it. So that's the kind of idea there. Very important analytical tool. So whenever you think of demand and demand curve, you also need to consider the shape of the elasticity of demand when it comes to your analysis. As I said, people, sellers, always looking to see how price sensitive the consumers are, and try to do their best through their loyalty programs, this and that, the other thing, to kind of limit your mobility to other providers and lock you in, etc., and that's good for the seller. On the supply side, we have the law of supply. And again, I've discussed these things in those short video clips, and I advise you to look at those and this one as well. This is the power of repetition. That's what they do in churches. They just repeat the same story over and over, so that you could really internalize, because every time you listen to it, you kind of begin to understand it just slightly better than before. The idea here is that if you are producing things, if the market pays you more, you have incentive to produce more or bring more to the market. So therefore, this is a quantity of X and price of X. If this is the price, you produce this quantity. If somebody pays you more, then you have reason to kind of gear up and produce more. And so if you connect, you get the supply curve and anywhere in between. And that's the law of supply. That basically says that holding everything else constant, if the market price goes up, most producers will gear up to produce more. Not everybody. Some people, price is not that important. At some point, they don't have access to resources. You pay them all you want, they can't do it. It's just they don't have time, or they don't have what it takes. Gold miners in South Africa, sometimes they're not sent down below because the electricity is not reliable. So if they send the miners down below, they may lose power and they cannot operate the elevator to bring them back up. So it doesn't matter how much is the gold prices out there, that kind of thing. Electricity is not available today, and therefore miners don't go down into the mine, that type of thing. So sometimes, or if you're a surgeon and you're doing neurosurgery, and then by regulations you can do only 2 surgeries per day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and you're prohibited from doing more, because the idea is that you get too tired, make mistakes, etc., and so forth. If you're an airline pilot, the FAA puts a cap as to how many hours you can be in the flight condition because of the oxygen level, and so therefore they put a cap. Doesn't matter who pays you, you will be losing your license if you flew more than 22 hours per week, and so therefore your supply becomes capped. Essentially, you say, the supply curve will look like something like this. You increase supply, and then you reach a point you are capped with a certain level of activity or output, and doesn't matter how much is paid, supply doesn't change. Okay, and there are times that you could really produce large quantities without raising the price. You can just produce from here to here, and your supply remains flat because your cost doesn't change. If you to produce beyond this point, then the cost will begin to rise and you have to be paid higher prices. That's this portion we kind of show here most of the time. And then you reach a point where it doesn't matter how much price is in the marketplace, you just cannot deliver. In that case, you have a vertical portion of the supply curve, and that's an interesting thing to sort of think about. If you set up a clinic or a hospital for 100 patients per day, if patients arrive, that's the demand for medical care. At anywhere along that 100-bed arrangement, you basically are fine. You can deliver, and the cost doesn't change because you've already incurred all the expenses: doctors, nurses, equipment, beds, and everything is on site. If you get the extra 20 patients, you have to convert some of the hallways or some of the back rooms into a temporary patient room. You have to ask people to stay overtime, etc. People are stressed out and all that. Cost begins to creep up. So if you get patients along that range, then price has to go up to accommodate. And then once you hit the cap, all the hallways and the back room and the closets are converted into a patient care facility. There is no space left. Doesn't matter who pays you what. If there are more patients, there is no patient care. This is the output is patient care. There is no more care to be given. So do you auction it off at the highest bidder for the last slot here, or some other mechanism? But certainly there is no more patient facility or resources to be given. So for that reason, we sort of have an elaborate version. So the next question is that would anything besides the price will create an incentive or environment in which the more can be produced? Yes, of course. Technology is one. And so how does it work? It works in this fashion. Here is your current supply curve. P, X, and Q of X. At this price, you deliver this quantity. You come up with a clever way to do this production, whatever that is, a smarter, more efficient way. So the same level of output costs less, same level of output production costs less, and therefore can be priced lower. So therefore it could be, instead of this quantity, be priced at this one before you're in the business to do it, because that's the price you must have to produce this quantity. Now you've come up with a clever way. This price is good enough. So you have, at this price you even can do this job. So you could lower the price if you want to and sell this quantity. Or you've come up with this clever idea, same resources you have on site at the current price can actually produce more. They're more efficient. If you need more output, you could leave take the price as it is. Just use your efficiency, your clever ideas to actually crank up more patient care, for instance. So you could increase output at the existing price, or you deliver the old output, patient care, at the lower price. Which one you select depends on the level of competition and also the need or demand. If people, if they don't need more of your services, you just, one option would be lower price. And if people need your services, well, use the efficiency of your resource allocation to produce more without raising the price, that kind of thing. So if you connect these, you get the new supply curve. That's the impact of technology. Efficiency. And by technology, I don't mean machines and microprocessors. I mean method of production. Okay. You just have come up with a clever way. Rearrange the office, rearrange the staffing, rearrange the reporting structure. You make quicker decisions, no long meetings, huddle, decide, and move forward, as opposed to go sit and have a whole day meeting for a small decision, that kind of thing. So what if you have more resources? Well, you can use the resources to produce more. So if that's the case, this is your supply curve. At this price, you produce this quantity. I give you more resources. At the same price, you can do more job. Whatever it is that you do, more headcount, more force, space, whatever you need to do the job. If you have access to more of it, then you can do more output. So this is more input, more output. If you lose the inputs, you lose the ability to produce. So doesn't matter about the prices, you just don't have resources to do it, and so quantity produced will decline. And then the impact of tax, for example, is another factor that that alters the supply. For instance, this is a supply curve, and at this price you produce this level of output. If we impose tax, so this is a plus tax, supply curve shifts to the left. This is the higher tax. Same quantity, price plus tax is a left shift. I'm sorry. This is the original supply curve. This is the price, and if I impose tax by this amount, this would be a new. So the supply shifts to the left. If I lower the, if I subsidize this production, government say that I'll give you, I'll pick up some of that land cost. Some states and local governments offer incentives. They say you come and open up shop here, and you don't have to pay taxes, or we'll build road to your location, or we'll provide the power line or sewer line and all that. We pay for it. You just kind of agree to come. So we subsidize the cost of setting up a factory or operation. In that case, basically you lower their cost, and by lowering their cost they can do more. This is with subsidy. So the same level of output costs less and therefore could be priced less. That's why governments subsidize activities in order to help the producers to be able to afford to sell it at a lower price, because the taxpayers pick up some of their expenses. And one thing I want to remind you again and again is the difference between cost and price. Price is a market. It is a market result. Supply and demand meet, and there's a price comes out. Cost is what sellers, producers, providers must incur to secure the resources to produce the product. So if you move your cost of making production of making shirts or socks to Vietnam, you can greatly reduce cost. And do you reduce the price? Maybe not. Maybe just slightly. Even though you reduce, so you add to your profit margin. That's the idea. So there's a difference between, although in everyday language, unfortunately, people refer to price as cost and so forth, and they're actually distinctly different ideas that needs to be remembered. To sort of have a better feel for how you understand the supply side, quantity supply for a product is a function or depends on its price. Input availability and their prices. Technology, which we discussed. Government regulations. The idea is that to comply with the regulations, you have to incur cost, and that shifts the supply to the left. Taxes, subsidies, producer expectation. If you expect the future for your product to be bright, you gear up to produce more and so forth. And then a number of players, number of suppliers. This last one affects not individual production or supply, but overall market supply. So, and then we close this thing here, as opposed to the demand conversation, which was an open-ended. Here, or not, the conversation about how to produce things is not an open-ended conversation. You need to see the price. You need to see the price of resources and their availability and so forth. Technology impacts it. Government regulation, taxes, subsidies, and so forth. So that's not an open-ended conversation. Of course, embedded in the input price is the productivity. You hire a nurse, you pay a salary, and then you ask us and say, is this nurse worth the money? Meaning that, is she or he productive enough? So this basically says that when there is a change in the price of the product itself, you move up and down to a new location on the existing supply curve. All other factors, inputs available in their prices, technology, government regulation, also all those causes right shift or left shift in the supply curve. Very, very important distinction when you're using market model to analyze an exam question. And of course, we kind of discussed this as separate pieces, but then if we put them together, it gives you the market model: supply and demand, quantity and price, and this is where the equilibrium price is, and this is equilibrium quantity. Buyers and sellers interact, and it's an equilibrium. Now, how quickly you arrive at, some things like currency market and so forth, practically within seconds. Prices of dollar or yen or yuan or euro is determined globally and is on the screen of every investor all over the world, that kind of thing. And then some products takes months to adjust to a new equilibrium, to settle down. And internet has helped to come up with an equilibrium price at a faster pace than it used to be. For farm products are posted, and instantaneously farmers everywhere can see how much a bushel of wheat is sold, or a ton of pork belly and so forth. So that's the idea. If the price is set above equilibrium, producers get excited at that price, they produce more. Buyers are discouraged, they cut back on purchase. So you end up with more availability than there's a demand, so you get what we call surplus or excess supply. If you set prices below equilibrium, buyers get excited and want to buy more. Sellers are discouraged, they cut back on production, so you end up with shortage or excess demand. And what are the consequences? Well, if there's a shortage and nothing is interfering with that, the shortage will cause prices to rise. As the price rises, then some sellers get back in to take advantage of it. Some buyers are discouraged and get out, and you go to the equilibrium. Similarly, if there's a surplus, prices begin to decline. Some sellers get out, they're not interested at the lower prices to be in the play. Some buyers get in, they get excited with the new prices that are lower, and you go back to the equilibrium. That's the idea of market mechanism, and much reliance on market mechanism as a way of allocating labor. If wages are set above equilibrium, there are more people who are willing to work than there are people who are willing to hire them, theoretically. So there will be a flood of workers standing around waiting to be hired, and nobody wants them because the price is set above their wages. And if you set their wages below, there are more people who want to hire those cheap workers than there are available, and so there will be a shortage, and so eventually the market will clear. And that's the sort of supposedly the beauty of the market mechanism, except that this adjustments and this sort of elimination of surplus or shortage may be very slow, and in some cases, and so that's something to think about. We have competitive markets. Many buyers and many sellers and buyers. So no one can corner the market. Supply and demand will determine the outcome. everybody sells the same stuff, identical products. So people don't care, buy it from you or somebody else, they get it from wherever it's cheaper and so forth and so on. So there's a buyers and sellers interact, the price will drop. How does an individual competitive firm will behave in this environment? Well, they take this market price, and that price they sell as much as they can afford to bring it to the market, so that they face very, very price sensitive demand curve, perfectly elastic demand curve, because there's so many sellers and product is identical. Consumers have choice all over the place. They don't pay anything over the market price, like farmers market. How much of the world is in this sort of a competitive market? How much of stuff you and I buy that is brought to us through fierce competition? Not much. Most of what we buy is brought to us by large sellers with large influence in the marketplace and so forth. This is very interesting theoretical foundation to understand what follows in terms of, okay, what if the market is not as competitive as we would like it to be, and that leads to a sort of a non-competitive market. By non-competitive would mean price setting by firms. They have market power. Okay. Market power means that they don't have to accept market price. This is a price taker. This firm is price taker. They take whatever the market dictates. When you're a non-competitive producer in a non-competitive market environment, you are a price setter. You set the price. So how does that change the demand that you face? Well, it would be a downward slope instead of horizontal. You can set this price and sell this quantity. If you want to sell more, you set the price lower, that kind of thing. There's also, because when you lower the price for the last customer, you have to lower it for everybody else. So your actual marginal revenue will decline as you lower the price to sell more. And so therefore there is a curve called marginal revenue, which is below the demand curve. If you could sell every unit to the highest bidder and auction it off every single time, marginal revenue is equal to the price, and that would be, there would be no marginal revenue below demand curve. Every product, every unit you sell, somebody is priced, and you basically sell to the highest bidder, and you sell it individually. But you know, if you go to Walmart and you buy a shampoo, I mean, some people would have been willing to pay more, but there's a set price, so there are some people, so everybody pays less. Not only the last person who's happy with a $4, but everybody else below or before that individual also will end up paying less. So that's a marginal revenue sort of a idea there. So how much do they produce as a result? Well, if you are what we call profit maximizer, producer, you produce more as long as additional revenue, marginal revenue, is greater than additional cost to do it. Marginal cost. As long as producing one more unit brings you more revenue, additional revenue, that it contributes to your cost, you keep producing more. And this process continues until additional revenue is equal to additional cost. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So what does the marginal cost look like? The marginal cost curve looks like this. The rate of increase in cost will keep going up. Slope is upward. Like, remember we talked about marginal benefit, marginal cost. Here is a marginal cost. So what do you produce? Here is a level where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So this is the production level. How do you price it? Well, you go to see how much people are willing to pay. That's the price. That's the profit maximizing way for a firm to decide what to produce, how much to produce, and how to price it, and so forth. And I'm going to stop here. I've given you a lot of information to digest. Wanted to sort of give you sort of a lecture that you would normally not have in a classroom, that you would have had in a classroom setting, to sort of be able to digest and process this information maybe more